A mere 5 days away now from Atlanta, the site of the 2024-25 National Championship game. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Please leave those comments and questions there in the chat. Ohio State, Notre Dame, historic for many reasons. The first of the 12-team college football playoff format championship. Of course, the Buckeyes won the first of the 4-team variety. Bill Bender right next to me. The Sporting News is the place to be to catch Bill's work. And we do our best to get Bill on here each and every week and always enjoy the conversation. Bill, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Mark. Sorry if my voice sounds off. I've been battling this it's the back end of it. It should be out and done before I get down to Atlanta this week. But it's made my voice deeper. I don't know if it's made it better, but we're fighting through it.
You, my daughter, about 10 or 12 other people I know. Yes, it's that time of year. So hope you can do all the right things, rest and fluids and all those good things to get yourself back to it. Well, Bill, we've got Ohio State and Notre Dame. But before we get to that matchup, there was something that came down this morning that's just indicative of the times. Just wanted to get your thought on this. Jonte Cook, former 5-star, signed a Texas transfer portal addition to Washington all of like 48 hours ago, has decided, no, I'm going to jump back into the transfer portal. I'm not going to Washington. It just seems to be getting more ridiculous by the day in regards to what's allowable. And hopefully there's some type of structure that's going to be put in place that's more effective than what we see now.
Well, I just hope we tighten it up. That is another case of this. It feels like an every year. It'd be like if the NFL just had 1-year contracts is what it's starting to feel like. Like if every NFL player became a free agent after every year. And I don't like that vibe to it. I think that's one case. I don't even like the fact that, we're going to celebrate possibly Ohio State winning a national championship on Monday, but it's going to come with that tagline about, well, they bought this team. Well, that's the game now. And I've heard Kirk Herbstreit's defense. I just think, as Ryan Days tried to tell people, they basically kept guys, right? They had to spend to keep guys from going to the NFL, and they picked up some good transfers. I mean, Will Howard and Quinshawn, and obviously Caleb Downs was the prize. So, within the confines of what we're doing, I have no problem with that. I just think at large, we need to tighten this up. We probably need to get them under contract in some way and school employee, whatever. And that way we don't have instances like this because for the old school guys like me and you, it looks a little bit annoying.
Bill, I didn't even like what is now the old days where right after a national championship game, we would hear X, Y, and Z on this side of the championship game have opted out to enter the NFL draft, and X, Y, and Z. And that was certainly their right, and that was the next move that they needed to make. But it seemed to detract from a national championship game just hours after the game that guys, now for those guys that were graduating and had exhausted their eligibility, that was obviously expected. But for even the guys that were expected, it just took a little bit off of it when you had this player departure after the game. And now that's going to be compounded by more guys entering the transfer portal that are going to be announced just hours after the national championship game. Got Bill Bender here from the Sporting News breaking down college football. And of course, we are down to one game, 2 teams, Notre Dame and Ohio State. Bill, as I look at this matchup, I see, much like the Penn State Notre Dame matchup that we talked about, mirror images of each other in regards to makeshift offensive lines that have done admirably well, defenses that are strong on all 3 levels, although I think the Ohio State defensive line is just playing out of its mind. Double tandem at running back on both sides that are excellent. It seems to be the explosiveness of the Ohio State offense that is a difference on paper.
Right. Yeah. And how Notre Dame combats that and their margin for error is less than Ohio State's in this game. There's no question, because I thought Texas kind of offered a little bit of the blueprint, make sure that Jeremiah Smith doesn't beat you deep, keep it in front, To be fair, Ohio State had some penalties in the first half that killed some drives, and they had more opportunities that went away because of that. But I think if Notre Dame also will have the confidence of knowing that they've played these guys tight the last 2 years. I don't think the defense is the issue. I think it's, can they produce enough offense, sustain drives? You know, in these last 2 games, they've scored 24 points against Ohio State total, an average of 12 points per game. That will get them beat 28-14, 31-14. That's not good enough. So they're going to need to pass the ball down the field. And I think you said it best. The quick strike, high-powered offense that Ohio State has been in spots could be the difference. But to be fair, I don't think Ohio State played very well against Texas. I mean, by their standard, if that makes sense. They played very well defensively, but that could have been 38-14. But they got in their own way a little bit. And if they get in their own way a little bit here, it could get scary.
Jeremiah Smith obviously went off the first 2 games, and then Texas took a page possibly from Michigan. They gave him a ton of attention, didn't trust their corners one-on-one. It was effective, obviously effective in dealing with him solely. Now, Carnell Tate had a nice game. Emeka Buka actually had a pretty pedestrian game, 5 catches, 51 yards. So I would say overall it was pretty effective in that Ohio State scored 21 points on offense, and Texas kept them down. And of course, Texas's defensive unit's one of the best in the nation, but Notre Dame's is as well. I would think that they would probably attack the Jeremiah Smith issue the same way.
Yeah, I mean, they have a really good secondary. Xavier Watts and those corners have held up well. Christian Gray had the big interception against Penn State, and I think they're going to do the same thing. They're going to try to not allow Jeremiah Smith to get down the field, and they'll probably give up Emeka underneath and Carnell underneath and even G. Scott underneath a little bit. But I think it's just about preventing the big play and hoping to bait Will Howard into some mistakes. I mean, I think Ohio State's built in that Will Howard will throw an interception here and there. He threw one against Texas, but it didn't really change the game. He threw one against Tennessee that probably shouldn't have been an interception, but they need to force mistakes. I think they need to win the turnover battle. They've been able to feast on the turnover battle. I'm interested to see how Xavier Watts does against those Ohio State receivers on the back end. Does he create a turnover or two? And if that happens, like I said, Notre Dame can make this a 4-quarter game.
Bill, I think going forward, you mentioned the familiarity of these 2 teams, especially being a non-conference game as opposed to some of the previous national championship games, Alabama, LSU, Alabama, Georgia, where, of course, they had played previously. But we've got veteran teams. So we may see this in the future, especially with the expanded playoffs, teams running into each other from outside conferences, but there being so much player movement that they're not being the familiarity that we see with 2 extremely staunch veteran teams playing for a third time in 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes it fun. That Notre Dame's kind of reminded me also. Both of these defense remind me a little bit of Michigan last year. A lot of veteran guys that aren't necessarily, like, if you look at Ohio State's defense, all of those guys are going to get drafted, all 11. But I'm not sure outside of Caleb Downs and maybe Jack Sawyer that there's first-round guys on there. They'll be day 2 and day 3 guys for the most part. I think Jack's worked his way up to first round. He's on our latest mock draft at Sporting News. Notre Dame, same deal. Ton of second-round guys and third-round guys and veteran guys that played a lot of football together. And that's why these are the number 1 and number 2 scoring defenses in the country. And for people that tune in, and I despise the term casual fan, because if you tune in, you're tuning in. You're a college football fan. It's fine. I don't care how much you watch. You don't have to be a junkie. That you're going to see probably a kind of boring game if you're expecting a shootout, because these 2 are going to get after each other. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch that. I was at the last 2 games, and I kind of like the games where it's 5 plays determine it. And it's just edge of your seat. Okay, when is this one of these 5 plays going to happen? And I think that's what's going to happen on Monday evening in Atlanta.
Bill, I tend to like the games that range somewhere in the middle. And that's where the NFL usually lies in regards to scoring, because it's not a rock fight. It's not brutal to watch. The teams can't even complete a pass. those sorts of things. But it's just not this wild shootout where the secondaries are just incapable of keeping up with the receivers, blown coverages all over the place. Nobody's invested in tackling. It's a Big 12 game from 2009. That's what I like. I like a balance of offense and defense where the offense has to earn it. It's quarterbacks throwing in tight windows. It's receivers making excellent catches with DBs draped on them. And that's what the Penn State Notre Dame game turned into after being a pedestrian first half, a really balanced, really just physical, just entertaining football game.
Yeah, and Notre Dame can't have the first half defensively that it had against Penn State when the Nittany Lions I think they were rushing for 5 or 6 yards a carry. If you look at the box score at the end of the game, you would have been like Penn State won. They had 200 yards rushing, 40 rushing attempts by the book. Aller was inconsistent, but they had made a few plays. And then had you just looked at that box score, you would probably said, yeah, Penn State won like 24-17. 24-13, something like that, but they didn't. And, credit Notre Dame. I really think that game flipped on the first drive of the second half. 7 plays, 75 yards, and Riley Leonard, they score. Jeremiah Love a little later had that touchdown run that we've replayed 100 times, and they're tough. Marcus Freeman has them playing tough. I talked to Jim Tressel. We have a story going about Tressel on Marcus Freeman because of all these Tressel ball comparisons. And Jim was like, you know what? Marcus is his own man. Like, yeah, they do some things similar, but this is the Marcus Freeman signature is a little bit different. It's not, yes, it's defense, special teams, grinded out offense, but I would, he might be even a little more risky than Jim was when he coached at Ohio State. But it was a fun article to write, and, you'll get some insight onto how Freeman was a player with Tressel and what Jim thinks of the dilemma of watching his team, Ohio State, and one of his former players, Marcus Freeman, on Monday night. He said it's a tough one. He compared it to when he used to coach against Mark D'Antonio. It was really neat.
Bill Bender at the Sporting News, and Bill's work you can find there. Just follow him on X, and also you see the Sporting News handle right there as well. Senior writer at the Sporting News. We appreciate Bill stopping by each and every week. And you mentioned the Marcus Freeman angle. It's not necessarily storybook because they've already faced each other twice, so it's old hat at this point. It's been dealt with in the past. Obviously, this game has higher stakes, but unless you really have followed either Ohio State or you're just a college football junkie, or you've caught up with this story very recently, I don't know that people really realize how much Marcus Freeman was aligned with Ohio State as not just some scrub player. He, again, he's not going to be remembered 15 years later by the casual fan because he didn't become some NFL star or anything, but all Big Ten linebacker for really good Big Ten championship teams. Met his spouse at Ohio State, grew up in Ohio, all those things, and now faces the Buckeyes for the national championship. Another thing for you to write, and I'm sure you've taken off on that.
Yeah, it is. And there's so many angles to this. And so it's fun. I think we talked about this before the semifinals. I apologize if we didn't, but for me, it's easy. Central Ohio, growing up there, going to a Catholic school. My son goes to a Catholic school, and the mix of, you have a little bit different viewpoint of it there because, yes, most people are Ohio State fans, but you've got a high percentage of Notre Dame fans in there too. And it's such a fun week when you get these games because there is that little bit of back and forth. And, there is a high percentage of Notre Dame fans in this area as well. Not higher than Ohio State, not even close, but it's going to make for the atmosphere of that game. I mean, you have 2 of the top 5 all-time winningest programs. You have, their followings, the coach angle. I mean, everything, and then I think some of the fallout on the loser, for Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman, I'm not going to say he'll get a free pass, but if they get blown out, that a lot of people are piling on Brian Kelly right now. And it's like, I don't know if Notre Dame would be in this position without Brian Kelly. The sustained success that they had over the years. It had been a lot worse before he got there. So I'm not doing that with BK, even though he left LSU. And then, of course, with Ohio State, I mean, what would the season feel like? You go, I'm losing track of how many games they played. They're 13-2, right? So you go 13-3, lose a national title, and 2 of your losses are to Notre Dame and Michigan. I don't, yeah, like what's that feel like in Columbus on Tuesday morning if they lose? So it definitely, there's some fallout there either way.
Yeah, no question about that. Ohio State, Notre Dame on Monday night. Bill Bender from the Sporting News helping us break it down. And absolutely, and as I see some Michigan guys in the chat, our guy John D'Adamo in particular, who helps us host the Michigan channel, of course, they're always going to have the rivalry one-upsmanship. So my channel thrives on that to a certain extent, even though this is what I expected or was taken from us in 2022, where Ohio State's the national champion. Michigan won the game head-to-head, so they can go at it all off season. But here we go. It's rather just kind of mind-boggling, just the dynamics of this rivalry. It's unlike anything else I've seen.
Well, there was one that I saw, I think Kyle Rowland tweeted something, or Kyle responded to a tweet, and Kyle's a good friend, does a great job at the Blade, of this dynamic. If you're a Michigan fan, who are you rooting for? I mean, the answer is Notre Dame, right? Like, yes. Because why would, but Kyle was fascinated. I think there is a fascinating wrinkle there where, well, would you maybe like pull for Ohio State a little bit? And then they can say they will, and the answer is no, but they have a national title, but they didn't beat you. And that's, I guess, I think the way I was wording that because as I'm a big Packers fan, I believe they won a Super Bowl one year and they lost the Bears during the regular season. I do not remember that Bears regular season game. I kind of remember it, unfortunately, but that did not impact my joy for beating the Steelers in the Super Bowl one bit. So I think that's something to keep in mind as you get into these things. Plus the Packers beat the Bears in the playoffs that year, but that is a new wrinkle to this. And you know what? I was at an appointment a couple weeks ago, and I heard these two, I was listening to I wasn't like eavesdropping, but I heard these two people talking in a waiting room. And the one guy said, they were talking about Michigan, Ohio State. And one of these men said, gradually with each year, that Michigan game is going to lessen in importance. And I'm worried about that. If the common person, not the casual fan, but the person that's sitting next to you in the waiting room is saying that means that conversation's being had in a lot of places.
Absolutely. Because as you made that correlation between Ohio State, Michigan, Bears, Packers, I was going to say, now come on, Bill, Ohio State and Michigan, right. But it's descending a little bit. I sense that. I feel it myself. I try to separate myself, try to come at it from an unbiased, fair way, but I'm an Ohio State fan, and I feel it myself. Give me the national championship. I would have said 25 years ago, give me the Michigan win, not the national championship. Today, it's not even close. It feels like the NFL.
Yeah, and it's going to feel more like that, and that's what these college football playoffs felt like to me. Like you forget about, like the Oregon loss is a distant memory now on October 12th, because I was like, well, I watched them beat them in January by 20, and I watched them crush Tennessee. You watch them beat Texas, and you can't question Ohio State's path at all. They went through 3 very good teams. You can't really question Notre Dame's path. They went through, an Indiana team that everybody loved. They beat Georgia, they beat the SEC champion, and they beat, Penn State that really could have won that game. So, it sets up this awesome matchup between these two brands, these two schools, the two defenses we mentioned. And I think there are tweaks. We had a column at Sporting News about what I would tweak, and it's stuff you and I have talked about. Let's seed this right. Let's shorten the playoff calendar. Maybe put the second round on home campuses. One thing I pointed out was Oregon has lost 1 home game under Dan Lanning, and Georgia's won 31 in a row at home. So yeah, they probably would have taken a home game instead of a neutral site game in the second round.
Bill, I think you're referring to the 2009 NFC Championship game, correct?
I'm pretty sure. Did the Packers lose the Bears that year?
When Jay Cutler got knocked out of the game, correct? And I cannot remember the completely obscure backup quarterback who came in.
Caleb Haney. I do remember that. So I got Caleb Haney, and
21-14, I believe, was the final score.
Right.
I
Now,
believe.
the Bears, before they got in so they did, I think we won the Super Bowl in 2010, actually. Let me make sure that's right. Yeah, 2010. So the Packers went 10-6 in the regular season that year. They lost at Chicago 20-17, and it was a heartbreaking loss. They lost to Detroit 7-3. I remember that game. Aaron Rodgers left with a concussion. And then they go on a playoff run. And they go through Philadelphia, and they go through Atlanta, and they go through the Bears and Caleb Haney at the end of the game. B.J. Raji had a touchdown I'll never forget. I remember that stuff. I'm like looking at these regular season games right now, and I'm like, I don't really remember that one. So that's what's going to happen, in college football. And, Ohio State fans aren't going to care Tuesday morning if they win. They're going to celebrate a national championship, as they should. That's the sport. But to think that a little bit of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry from a regular season standpoint will diminish a bit, it will. It will. And, that's one of the consequences of this new era.
And I understand the Michigan argument. If I were a Michigan fan on Tuesday morning, if Ohio State wins the game, this is no guarantee, folks, of course. I'm still trumpeting 4 consecutive wins. We beat the national champions this year. We went 15-0. You lost 2 games, although to me, to reference the NFL,
right,
you win a championship, you win a championship. And to your point just a minute ago, Ohio State will have completed the toughest road to a national championship ever in the postseason.
Mm-hmm.
You defeat 4 of the top 7 teams in the country. And for Notre Dame, Indiana like back at 10, but 4 of the top 10 teams in the country, that's a monumental feat to accomplish.
Right. Absolutely. And, that's what makes it so fun. I put 27-17 Ohio State. I think it's going to be like the last 2 games with probably a little more offense. You never know who comes out in a game like this. The last 6 national title games have been blowouts. We put all this pomp into it and preparation, and it's a team that's kind of been there, done that, helps. But yeah, I think Notre Dame will hang in the game. They can't turn the ball over. If they turn the ball over, have 2 or more turnovers, it's going to be bad news. And I think Ohio State would be able to pull away there. But, I think the emotion of this game, the hot ticket, all those things come into play. But at the end of the day, I think Will Howard makes a few plays in the passing game. The Buckeyes at just a little bit of an advantage in offense and throwing the ball, and it'll show up in this game.
Last year turned into a blowout. Bill, if we term last year's game a blowout, I don't know what to term the 2022 national championship. I don't know what to call that.
Yeah.
That was like
I called it, I was done writing at halftime. I just had to tack on paragraphs at the end and whatever Kirby said after the game. That was a brutal one. Last year it broke open in the fourth quarter. But I never thought at any point last year that Michigan was going to lose. So I'm wondering if I actually have that feeling Monday where is there going to be a point where I think the Buckeyes are going to lose this game? I got there last year in South Bend real quick. I'm like,
sure.
Oh, it was like early. I was like, wow, this is a 50-50 game. And, it went from there. So it'll be a lot of fun to get down there and find out.
Bill, I tacked a field goal onto your score.
Mm-hmm.
I went 27-20, maybe a little bit more drama, but that was my score prediction on this one.
Well, great minds think alike, obviously. You got them covering then. And I'm, anytime you see a 9-point spread in a championship game setting, I get leery of that because these are college kids. It's a championship setting. Now, I forget what the Georgia TCU spread was, but I think I took Georgia right away on that one.
Oh, I did too. It was in the 14-17 range.
At least it's not that high.
Bill, we appreciate you being here. And of course, we encourage everyone to check out Bill's work. You see his X handle and Sporting News right there. Check out Bill's work as you prepare for the national championship game. Bill, the Aaron Rodgers reference leads me to a discussion maybe during the offseason when we can push college football out of the way for a couple minutes. Would love to talk about Aaron Rodgers legacy. Get your take on that. Would be fascinating.
I will. No, it's as he is very complicated. So no, and yeah, I guess I just made it through this segment. My voice is starting to go. This is probably
Okay.
a good time. Yeah, but this was a lot of fun, and yeah, I don't want to embarrass your the
Oh,
listeners. Be like, what's wrong with that guy?
You
No.
honor us with your presence, Bill. You're great. We appreciate you being here.
All right, thanks so much. I'll talk
Thanks,
to you
Bill.
next week.
Enjoy the game.
Appreciate it. You too.
Bill Bender, the Sporting News, typically joins us on Wednesday, as he did today. Sometimes I record, sometimes live, but I thought I would take some comments and questions. We left the link there in the chat if you'd like to give me a call about the national championship game or anything concerning college football. I posted on X today what I think is just completely ridiculous. I'm not going to fault the player, but it was Jonte Cook, an original signee at Texas who transferred to Washington, for 48 hours. Now he's changed his mind, and I guess he's going back in the transfer portal. It's just nuts. And again, we should not in any way blame these players. It's not the players. It's the game, as they say. It's the system. All right. So let's see who's in the chat. It's always a good crew. The Rod Farba, good morning. D-Rock Irish, good to see you. Wet Blanket. Of course, anytime Wet Blanket can take a shot at Ohio State, he will. Ohio State could win the national championship by 8 touchdowns, and Wet Blanket is going to demand that, I don't know, that they overturn all of them. But we appreciate you, Wet Blanket. Hopefully the Cowboys play better for you next year. John, good to see you as always. Of course, the Michigan show is every Tuesday and Thursday night. Of course, the live show with John and TJ on Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And then TJ takes your calls on Thursday night. Rufus, go Bucks. Drew McFly, look, guys, Notre Dame is a great story. They made it to the Natty, but this game, to me, seems like a complete mismatch with all the injuries that Notre Dame has. Rufus, obviously a Go Bucks, so he's an Ohio State fan. People shocked we made the championship. You would need to show those people to me, Rufus. Who in the world is shocked that Ohio State, who, of course, I predicted to win the national championship before the season started. I'm not going to tell you who I picked them to beat in the national championship game, Alabama. But, yeah, I can't think anyone with half a brain is shocked that Ohio State is in the national championship game. D-Rock Irish, interesting fact. Notre Dame running back Jeremiah Love in 2022 made an official and unofficial visit to Notre Dame. In both instances, he witnessed 2 upset losses against Marshall and Stanford and still signed with Marcus Freeman despite seeing those 2 debacles against those 2 horrendous football teams. And here we are 2 years later, and Jeremiah Love made a great decision based on not emotions of what he saw on the field that day, but obviously saw the leadership and capabilities of Marcus Freeman and fell in love with Notre Dame. So good for him. Drew says Ohio State has a chance to beat Penn State, Indiana, Tennessee, Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame in one season. No one has done anything like that. 6 playoff teams. Drew, I would hold back on that particular statement. Okay. So during the postseason, Ohio State being the first, there will be other teams. Obviously, anyone who wins a national championship going forward is going to have a similar run, especially if they didn't win a conference championship and got a bye, if we stay with this format and this seeding. But somebody that's going to have to make their way through 4 teams, especially as lowly seeded as Ohio State was at number 8, they should have been seeded higher. We all know that. Should have been seeded ahead of Penn State, but they're playing their way through it. Doesn't matter at this point. The postseason run is the toughest in the history of college football and will be somewhat matched next year and then next year and the next year and the next year. So that is not a bias to take. It's just simply the format of the playoffs now, when you beat number 7 Tennessee, number 1 Oregon, number 3 Texas, and then number 4 Notre Dame, correct? I'm not talking about the seedings, I'm talking about the rankings. So anyway, 4 of the top 7 teams in the country. That will be the most impressive run and the most difficult run to a national championship in the postseason. But in terms of a regular season, we cannot definitively say that that's the toughest schedule at all, because I can think of some brutal schedules out there. Go look up LSU in 2011, look up Auburn in 1983. In terms of regular seasons, Ohio State played nobody in non-conference play. And they played Indiana, Oregon, Penn State, 3 really good teams, obviously, in the regular season. David, it almost happened in 1996. We could have gotten at least a share of the national championship with Florida. Please refer to the Mark Rogers book, Disputed National Champions. Well, David, thank you for the plug there. There it is, Disputed National Champions. We dissected every year of the 1990s. Why the 90s? Point number 1, I eventually want to do every decade. We just happened to start in the 1990s because we determined that to be a sweet spot for the audience. A lot of you were around in the 1990s, watching college football in the 90s, love 1990s college football. But mostly I chose this decade because I believe it to be the most impactful and definitive decade in the history of college football in determining a champion. It's when the system changed from strictly the poll era to the next step, the bowl coalition. We're going to match 1 and 2 because you could have number 1 playing number 9, number 2 playing number 18, number 3 playing number 5, number 4 playing number 7 in bowl games because of the tie-ins. That at least guaranteed outside the Pac-10 and the Big Ten that the number 1 and 2 teams would play starting in 1992. Then in 1997 was the BCS, which ushered in at least a formula to match up what were considered to be the top 2 teams in the country. And then, of course, the forerunner to the playoff. So we dissect every year during the 1990s. We look at preseason storylines. We take you through the season, all the key moments, the key plays that resulted in the championship race, and then the postseason assignments, postseason play, who won the big games, how that laid out, the final rankings, who benefited, who was screwed, who was left out, and then the ramifications from that particular season on history. But it's just not a history book. We take every season of the 1990s. This was the most fun part for me. Took every season of the 1990s and propelled it into the future formats of college football, the BCS era. What would have happened? Who would have been selected? The 4-team college football playoff era. What 4 teams would have made the playoffs from the 1990s had it been 2014 through 2023? And then the 12-team era, and then the 14-team possibility. So the links in the description section down below. Yes, in my eyes, in 1996, I think one of the flaws of the system and people's perceptions prior to the BCS is that they treated bowl games like playoff games. They weren't playoff games. There was no tournament. There was no connection between bowl games. The bowl championship series, I always loved that marketing ploy. The bowl championship series. It's not a series. They're individual games on individual sites that have nothing to do with one another. There is no connection between the Orange Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, the Rose Bowl, the bowl championship series. It was just a marketing ploy to try to get you to feel as though, Oh, I'm watching number 5 and number 8 in the Orange Bowl tonight. The national championship's coming up in 3 days, but this is somehow tied into that. It wasn't. It's just a completely separate event that had nothing to do with it. So bowl games are not playoff games. Therefore, in a case like 1996, Florida annihilated Florida State in the second half. It was a close game at halftime, so it took some time, but they beat them 52-20 in the Sugar Bowl to avenge a last weekend of the season loss to Florida State. And therefore, Florida, by defeating the number 2 team in the country, was handed or awarded the national championship in 1996. Why? I can't exactly explain that. If I had a ballot, I would have split my vote, as a couple of voters did actually split their votes between Florida and Ohio State. They both went 11-1. They both lost their rivalry game. Florida had the opportunity to avenge its loss. Ohio State did not. However, they went to the Rose Bowl and beat the number 1 team in the country. Florida won it for 2 reasons in people's minds. Number 1, they got to avenge their loss. Number 2, they did it emphatically. That's why Florida won the national championship in 1996. But if you look at it logically, Florida, Ohio State, and guess what? Even Florida State should share the national championship. They all went 11-1. And Florida beat Florida State beat Florida. Ohio State lost to Michigan. They beat the number 1 team in the country, Arizona State, in the Rose Bowl. If you look at the number of top 10 wins, ranked wins, all those sorts of things across the board, you have 3 powerhouse 11-1 teams. They should share the national championship. And in my book, they do. Anything else in the chat? Modine's here. College football is dead. Mo, you have just damned my channel and network to the abyss. Thank you for doing that. Moose says Iowa had a top 5 defense last year. Moose, I almost jumped on that comment because I thought you were about to say this year. Iowa took a tumble on defense this year. Their offense was so much better. They actually had a functional offense this year. Did you pay attention to Iowa's offensive resurgence this year? It was prolific by Iowa standards. They went from worst in the nation to 75th, 80th, something in that range. And we always thought, man, with their special teams and their defense, they can contend for championships with just a mediocre to bad offense. Well, they got it this year with Caleb Johnson almost becoming a serious Heisman candidate, leading the Big Ten in rushing, and a functional passing game. But the defense took a tumble. But yes, in 2023, Iowa had a tremendous defense. Check out the Iowa show. We get together with Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm every Tuesday at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. On yesterday's show, as we were recognizing the punter, can't think of his first name, Dakin, as being named a freshman All-American. If you look at, and in the kick returner, the punt and kick return specialist for Iowa, again, I can't remember his first name, Wetchin, he was named on the All-America team and the return specialist of the year. And of course, they had a great kicker in Drew Stevens. Iowa, nobody brings this up. Iowa's not just tight end you currently, I'm not talking all time, currently tight end you, no doubt, last 10 to 15 years. Iowa is also special teams you. Best punters, best kick return specialists, best place kickers many times, but certainly the best punters over the last several seasons. Torrey Taylor is exceptional currently in the NFL. Special teams U. I don't see anyone going with special teams U. I see wide receiver U, tight end U, DB U, all these other positions. I don't see a special teams U, but we are awarding that to the Iowa Hawkeyes currently. And yes, I do remember Tim Dwight. Fast as lightning. White Lightning, Tim Dwight. Although that nickname was given to Doug Donnelly, but Tim Dwight, who then played for the Atlanta Falcons. Absolutely. Reese Dakin. Thank you. Reese, and when I put him in my notes, I always write it a different way because I want to remember it's pronounced Reese. Looks like rice, like John Rice Plumlee, the former UCF and Ole Miss quarterback, but it's Reese Dakin. Thank you so much for that. I blanked on his first name, just like I did the kick returner, who I believe is Caden Wetchen. Now that's coming to mind. Punting is, in fact, winning. Yes. Mo says, Mark, just do college basketball. That's now what college football is. So, Mo, when he says college football is dead, I got to say that I thought that you were referring to NIL and transfer portal. Of course, that exists in college basketball as well. But apparently, you're talking about this playoff. You are not happy with the playoff. I'm guessing you're not an Ohio State or Notre Dame fan. You're unhappy with the playoff. I like the playoff. It's not perfect. I like it. Yes, David. In fact, Florida did lose to a better team, Florida State, than Ohio State losing to a 8-4 Michigan team. I believe they were 6-4 when they beat Ohio State. Then they beat Ohio State. Then they lost the Outback Bowl to Michigan. So maybe they were 7-3, went to 8-3, went to 8-4. I do believe. Gerard Jones. I am going to pronounce your name both ways so I don't screw it up, or only 50% of the time. Appreciate you being here as always. College football has never been better. Now, does that have anything to do with Ohio State playing in the national championship game? Or you can objectively say college football has never been better. Even if Ohio State would have lost to Tennessee, would you make the same claim? Or is that a biased statement based on the results from the Buckeyes? The Rod Farba. Maybe I'll do a little book reading since nobody's calling and I don't feel like going to work. Maybe I'll read oh, that's right. That was 2000. My book ends in 1999. So that was not a screw job for Miami. I get your point, the Rod Farba, that the deal in 2000, if you're not aware, folks, or forget, is that Oklahoma was the only undefeated team in the country, and they played Florida State in the national championship game. Florida State had one loss. That was to Miami. Problem is, Miami also had only one loss. But the issue there, the Rod Farva, is who did Miami lose to? They lost to Washington. Washington only had one loss. So you had a round robin, Washington, Florida State, Miami. In my eyes, Florida State gets eliminated because they lost head-to-head to Miami. Close game. But Miami lost to Washington. Washington's loss, I've looked this up many times, but I forget it. Arizona? They lost to a good team, but they beat Miami. Certainly, there should have been a 4-team playoff. That would have been the best way to attack it, a 4-team playoff. But under the system at the time, I would have gone with Oklahoma and Washington in the national championship game. Yes, I don't know if the Rod Farva is arguing with me or somebody else in the chat. Yes, we are sizing up head to head. So we're honoring the head to head Washington and Miami. So Washington in the 2000 national championship game. We've got Moose who, okay, explain this record business to me. Because Moose, you don't make any sense. So if you're going to say we've won 4 consecutive games against you, okay, that is a fact. Against Ohio State, Michigan's beaten Ohio State 4 consecutive years. Absolutely. Put that, put it on your house, put it on your car, put it wherever you want. But Michigan is not 4-0 against Ohio State. That statement is erroneous and moronic. 4-0, so we can just pick blocks of years. So you're not 4-0 against Ohio State. The Ohio State fan can come back and say, we're 8-4 against you. Why not say that? So Ohio State fan, shoot something back to Moose and say, we're a great team and we're 8-4 against you. Or what is it? 5, 6, whatever it is, 16-7 since 2001. This can go on all day. But yeah, not 4-0. Who's 4-0? Like if Jim Harbaugh was 4-0 or Sharon Moore was 4-0, then you would say Sharon Moore is 4-0 against Ohio State. And then I also see Michigan fans who are giving Sharon Moore credit for the game that he coached on the sideline against Ohio State, which is perfectly fine. He's 2-0 against Ohio State. Absolutely. However, if you do that, you have to make sure that you don't credit Jim Harbaugh with that same win. I see Michigan fans doing this all over the place. Seeing Sharon Moore's record against Ohio State, Jim Harbaugh's record against Ohio State, or that Jim Harbaugh beat Ohio State 3 consecutive times, but then they're listing Sharon Moore's 2-0 against Ohio State. No, you can't have it both ways. You can't take double credit for a win. That's, again, moronic. A lot of morons out there. We do our best to correct moron behavior. So do it either way. I think officially, I believe it's Sharon Moore's win. I believe they did a weird thing between the Big Ten and the NCAA in crediting these wins. They gave Harbaugh the wins, I believe, at the beginning of the season when he didn't coach the games, but they didn't give him the wins at the end of the season when he didn't coach the games. And I've not heard the reasoning there. And I think that he was coaching the team during the week both times. So regardless, it's just like Ryan Day gets 3 wins for when he coached for Urban Meyer. So I wouldn't, in fact, for example, say Ryan Day's X and X, whatever he is now, 69-10. I wouldn't say Ryan Day 69-10 and then also give those 3 wins to Urban Meyer. No, that's double dipping. I would tend to give those wins to Urban Meyer since he was the head coach. I know Ryan Day was the head coach on the sideline for the game, but Urban Meyer was the coach. Same thing here. I would tend to give Jim Harbaugh those wins against Ohio State, or that win in 2023 against Ohio State which would make him what? 3-5? And Sharon Moore would be 1-0. Or Sharon Moore's 2-0 and Jim Harbaugh's 2-5. And apparently there are Michigan fans who, maybe this has died down now, but after the euphoria of winning the national championship, wanted to raise a statue to Jim Harbaugh. And of course, so much is made of the rivalry game to a coach who went 2-5 against Ohio State. I just can't imagine that would be done elsewhere. All right. We got our friend Karen stopping by. You are learning in the chat, so you got to be careful, Karen. We don't know that you're learning anything in the chat. Yes, we have some fine college football fans, some great people in the chat. There is much knowledge in the chat. However, there's a lot of crap in the chat too. So it's both. You got to be discerning. Maybe you bring the info to me and then I filter it out, tell you this is the garbage, this is the good stuff, this was the wisdom, this was the idiocy. So we've got both going in the chat. And that's fine too. We allow that. We don't go crazy. If I see illogical comments in the chat, I usually let them go. If I see inaccuracies and misinformation in the chat, then we call that out here at the Voice of College Football. But no one is calling me. Record books, give it to Moore. Yes, we're aware of that. The Rod Farba is making it clear. Yes, the record books do give it to Sharon Moore. So he is 2-0 against Ohio State, and Jim Harbaugh is a sterling 2-5 against Ohio State. Moose. Well, Moose, there's nothing to debate here in terms of whether Michigan cheated. Connor Stallions cheated. Okay, that is confirmed. Connor Stallions was a member of the Michigan coaching staff. Now, what I would like to know is where that information went. I don't care. I don't even care how effective it was, because that's not the point of cheating. If I cheat in anything against anyone, I only do it for one reason. One reason. That's the only reason I cheat, is because I fear I'm going to lose. That's the only reason you cheat. So what happened with the information that Connor Stallions compiled? What did he do with that information? That's what I want the NCAA to tell us. And as I stated when this story first broke, the first day, I said, I hope none of this is correct. None of it's factual. I hope it's all made up. I want the games to be clean. That didn't turn out to be the case. Do I think it was effective? Do I think it changed the outcome of games? You know what? I don't know. Nobody knows. We can conjecture, we can argue, we can go back and forth. There is certain evidence on both sides. There is certain evidence to indicate, wow, Michigan played its best football practically in the history of the program during those 2.5 years. There's also evidence, obviously, that Michigan continued to win and wrapped up the national championship after Stallions was absent from the scene. But I do know this, that if Connor Stallions, now even the most ardent Michigan fan with a functioning brain that wants to use it and wants to be logical and wants to be honest, that's really the missing piece here. Wants to be honest, would say, knowing the paranoia and the attention to detail that any good college football coach applies to his program, Jim Harbaugh included, who, by the way, I was an apologist for in 2020. And I'm probably speaking to people right now that wanted Jim Harbaugh fired, who said, don't fire the guy. That would be a horrific move. He's an excellent football coach. Hello. Wind up the videotape. That's what I need a staff here for, to go look up all those items. I came across a conversation the other day and I was thinking, man, I'd love to have a staff to dig that up because I know I said X, Y, and Z. So anyway, I don't know that anyone has brought up this angle to the situation, but if I'm a major college football coach and I have some peon who has determined something and has some information he's gathered, regardless of how it was done, and he brings that to my defensive staff, to me, my D coordinator, he wouldn't be continuing to do that 2 years later had it not been successful. If I didn't find value in that, that would have ceased to exist. So either Connor Stalions was acting completely on his own, and this started with him completely acting on his own, which I tend to believe. I don't have any basis to believe that, but I think it started as a solo venture. And then once he brought the information to the Michigan staff, what was done with it? Seems like there's evidence that it was used. That if it did not impact the game or it did not help them, why would they continue to use it? Why would he and his information, why would he continue to be listened to and his information used 2.5 years later if it was not valuable? Explain that to me. Somebody explain that to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. I would think that there would have been an NCAA investigation a couple of years later that would have uncovered this guy, Connor Stalions, who was fired halfway through the 2021 season. What he was doing was he was bringing information that was gathered against the rules, and he brought that to the coaching staff, and they said, we want no part of that, and they fired him. And that's why that guy got fired 2 or 3 years ago. Not that he's been on the staff until they got caught, and then he got dismissed. If somebody can please explain that to me, then please do. Now, I have not talked about this topic in forever. And I got sick of talking about it for the first 3 or 4 months that it was huge news, or probably well beyond that. And I came to a determination, and I'm still on that determination. I know that Connor Stalions cheated, and by extension, as a member of the Michigan coaching staff, Michigan cheated. Now, I don't know if Michigan, meaning the brain trust, Harbaugh, who would that have been at the defensive coordinator position, the guy that went to the Ravens, McDonald, and then they had another defensive coordinator at that time. It would have been the next guy that came through that Wink Martindale replaced. Anyway, I don't know if they used the information and cheated. I don't know. It's like if I owned this massive company and one of my lackeys somewhere went out and had inappropriate dealings with a business connection of ours as a company, but nobody else had any knowledge of it. It would still be Mark Rogers, the voice of college football's company, had illegal dealings with X, Y, and Z. Even if I had no knowledge of it and nobody else in the company had any knowledge of it, there would still be, by extension, as an employee, my responsibility, my accountability. Now, it can be understood and explained. Nobody else had any knowledge of this. Well, thank you, Moose. That's what I'm talking about right there. Exactly. That's the crux of it right there. And if Connor Stallions acted alone, and that's the end of it right there. And I have been very honest and upfront and upstanding from a journalistic standpoint in not reporting the story, of course, because the story's been reported and the facts and the information reported, but giving my take on it to say, I am not indicting Michigan in any way. That's what I want to have answered. You are correct, Moose. Based on my understanding, nobody has been linked to Connor Stallions on the Michigan staff. I am just drawing some conclusions, or I am leading us on a path to say, I would like to have some questions answered. I would like to have a few questions answered. And I just stated most of those questions. But I agree with you, Moose. And you know what, Moose? I hope that's the truth. I sincerely hope. I'm guessing most Ohio State fans do not hope that that's the truth. They hope that Connor Stallions told everybody used that information, and but I hope we find out the truth. We are still waiting on the NCAA. We are still waiting. Should be interesting. I would just like college football fans, sports fans, and people in general to be honest enough and to have enough integrity to own up to the truth when they are presented with the facts, myself included. Case in point, as a football coach, I like and supported Urban Meyer. Thought he was a great hire, turned out to be a great hire. Thought he was a great coach. I in no way am supporting the man as a individual, father, husband, etc. I'm not criticizing him. I'm not damning him as those things. I'm just saying he has my support and my I have talked favorably about Urban Meyer as a head coach, as a professional, as a head coach. Okay. And it's kind of difficult not to. The guy's got the greatest winning percentage of all time. Okay. However, when he's done horrible things, reportedly horrible things, I don't know that these have been substantiated. Some of them have been on video. But anyway, we know that the various, I don't sit up here and try to defend it or ignore it, or he's not my responsibility. So it doesn't offend me in any way when people make fun of Urban Meyer or call out his iniquities. It's no reflection on me. I'm not responsible for Urban Meyer. I just call it for what it is. Great football coach who's done some confirmed bad things and some not confirmed but alleged bad things. But other people have done bad things as well. Everybody included. Okay. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, to conclude the verse. So I hope I made that point clear. I think people become too emotionally attached to their teams, and they believe it to be an indictment against them when their team or their program or their coach does something incendiary against the rules. See, I'm not the type that, let's say it comes out that Michigan did, that this investigation and the very worst that could be thought of concerning what Michigan did with this information is true. I'm not pointing my finger in Michigan fans' faces and saying, ha, ha, ha. You had nothing to do with it. It's not your fault. You root for a team. You root for a program for any number of reasons. You grew up in Michigan. You like the helmet, whatever. You like the fight song. You flipped on your first college football game when you were 7 and it happened to be Michigan. For whatever reason, you attach yourself to this team. And the players come and go and the coaches come and go. They basically wear the same laundry. That doesn't make you a bad person when the program or the coaches or the players do something bad. Now, you're out there on social media and you have to defend it, or maybe you feel like you have to defend it. Anytime an Ohio State player or coach has done something that has not been of the highest character, quality, I don't have to defend that. People throw it at me. That's to be expected. I'm a target. We're all targets to a certain extent, but I'm a big target because I do this. I don't try to defend them. I say, yeah, that guy should be suspended. That guy should be thrown in jail. That guy should be whatever I believe the proper punishment is. I don't try to explain it away or defend it or hide it because they wear scarlet and gray. No, if we found out that Ohio State cheated for the last 10 years, I'd say, I guess they cheated. If it was confirmed, they cheated and we should take all their wins away. So, do appreciate you being here, the voice of college football. And throughout the rest of the day, quite a slate. 2 p.m. Eastern time, we've got the Ole Miss show. 2 p.m. Eastern time, it's the Ole Miss show. We got Leanne Herring and Ruby Dreher, and they allow me on there. I don't know why, but it will be a much better show when they can get rid of me. And this is where I need a producer. Ole Miss, Ole Miss, Ole Miss, Ole Miss. There we go. Check out the Ole Miss channel. And again, we go live at 2 p.m. Eastern time every Wednesday to talk some Ole Miss football. There you go. 2 p.m. Eastern time's Ole Miss live with, again, Leanne Herring and Ruby Dreher. And then at 6 p.m. Eastern time, we got the Florida State show. That's on the FSU channel, of course, with Georgitis from the Renegade Report and myself, Cam Underwood, and me. Common theme here. I show up in all these. Myself and Cam Underwood. Miami live at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And then at 8 p.m. Eastern time, I believe we will simulcast across the board Ohio State, Notre Dame, and national channels. Brian Driscoll from Irish Breakdown with a look at Ohio State and Notre Dame. That's tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'm a busy guy on Wednesdays in particular. And then the Ohio State show that is typically on Wednesday is going to go live Thursday at noon Eastern. Buckeye fans, college football fans, be there Thursday at noon, the Ohio State show. But again, on Wednesday, today, Ole Miss at 2 p.m. Eastern, Florida State at 6, Miami at 7, Notre Dame at 8. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you at 2 Eastern.